Hello, welcome. I'm Commissar Marek, and today we are going to take a look at CZ3 Augustus and its health system in the game. The way health in CZ3 Augustus works is that each house on individual level has its own set value of health from 0 to 100. This reflects how healthy the inhabitants of this house are, and together they tie all the health of individual houses in your entire city into one value, which is called city health. And this value of city health can shift by +2 or -2 depending on overall housing in your city per month, which means that in a year it can change by +24 or -24 if your housing gets overall higher health value or lower health value. Now that we've established these differences between overall city health and individual health by house basis, we'll actually take a look at modifiers that affect the health of individual houses. The first thing to note is that in-game there are multiple ways to achieve highest health level in a single individual house, but the value itself is always capped at 100. Therefore, there are multiple ways to achieve highest health in your city. For example, you could feed your people multiple food types, or choose to go a different route and instead build a couple of mausoleums and give them a hospital in addition to a clinic. But these numbers will all need to be explained thoroughly, so just as a concept, you need to grasp that individually you could even achieve higher health than 100 if you add all the services as well as all the food types and everything, but realistically the game only allows you to achieve 0 up to 100 rating of health in a single individual house. So let's take a look at how the modifiers actually work. For each house you get 1 health point for each of its evolution levels, maximum of 10 evolution levels. So you can get, for small tents, which is the very first evolution stage, you get +1 health for that. If it evolves to large tents, it gets +2, and so on and so forth, until it reaches 10 evolution steps, at which point it will be capped. Another modifier is food type. If the house receives food, it will get its health buffed by 15 health points. This only applies to health that is surplus to its requirement though. So if there is a plebeian housing that's receiving a single type of food, it will actually not benefit from this buff. It will only benefit from its evolution stages, because the food is part of its requirement to achieve that evolution stage. In this case, if you were to have a small casa housing that receives 2 types of food, it would receive the 15 HP or health modifier, because it receives 1 food type in addition to its baseline. If you provide barber coverage to your housing, it will give the housing that are covered by this walker 10 health bonus, which is quite substantial, as you might imagine. So in Augustus it's always a good idea to keep barbers in our blocks even when they are tent blocks. If you provide your housing blocks with bathhouse access, it will give them a modifier of 20 health per house. If you give them a clinic access, it will give them a 30 health buff. So in addition, if you provide them with barber, bathhouse and a clinic, you can achieve +60 health right off the bat, because it's usually pretty easy to provide them with basic water, barber and a clinic, which are just things that you can immediately slap down, and that means that you will avoid the early fumigations or sickness events. We'll talk about those in the future along the video, but for now just keep in mind that this is what you should do in Augustus cities when you establish your first block. The sickness can actually get quite rampant quite quickly, so you should take care to establish these services as quickly as possible. One special case is if you were to give your block a hospital, it would give them 40 health buff, but they are tied together with a clinic access, which means that if there is only a clinic, it is plus 30 health, as I mentioned. If there is hospital, it's plus 40. But if you give them both, it will cap at plus 50. So just keep that number in mind, because it does matter. You cannot just rely on clinic and hospital to get very, very high values. This is the way to make sure that you actually have to diversify the means that you use to provide help to your city, and not just use the hospital and a clinic. Furthermore, in Augustus, you can actually use small mausoleums or large mausoleums to buff city health by, for small mausoleums, it's plus 1 health for each house in the city. It does not need a coverage or anything. And then a large mausoleum provides 2 health to all houses in the city. But this is capped at 10, plus 10, which means that you can achieve the max benefit by having 5 large mausoleums in your city or 10 small ones. This is actually quite useful, since they also count as a stronger oracle, basically. So if you have access to them, they are a great way to safeguard your city against sickness, as well as just generally keep your city worshipping the gods properly. On some maps, you might encounter contaminated water events, which will cause a hit to your overall city health modifier, which means that it could cause rampant sickness. If your housing is just about at a level where it's stable, contaminated water must just push that to a place where there might be sickness or even fumigations, and you want to prevent this. So if you are aware that map has these events, because they will trigger quite often, and you can usually realize that yes, this map in fact does fumigation, it does have contaminated water events quite early, you actually will have to take better care of the health in general, just because it's just a little bit more difficult to keep everything stable. What happens when a contaminated water event hits exactly is your city's health will get slashed by about 40% from its total value, and then it might slowly recover or get worse if your housing level is worse. So you need to be prepared for such hits, and so that you can always recover the health back up. And what happens when city health gets low enough is that housing that gets the lowest health will actually get hit by events. There are 2 kinds of events with health that are negative, and one of them is called fumigation, which means that it's the worst kind. It was included in the base game before, where it was the only health thing, where your housing will actually die off and you will have the hovering skull over the burning ruins, and they are not spreading fires, they are just burning out the disease basically, and so no prefects will extinguish that, just it will have to burn down on its own, and then you can replace the houses where they once stood. This is the worst case scenario, where you will lose all the people and all the goods that are stocked up in that house, and it will also take some time before you can replace it, and then it needs to evolve back again. So it's quite annoying. You want to prevent this if possible. Sometimes on maps with contaminated water it could happen quite early on, and it's not such a big deal with tents, but more so with evolved housing. In Augustus, if you don't take proper care of your health, it could totally happen even to your insulae, so just be mindful of that. The other kind of event, which is more soft event regarding health, is actually a sickness event, which means that a house will have a hovering skull over it, which means that it is indeed infected by disease, and there is a doctor from a clinic or a hospital that makes his rounds throughout the block, will have to stop by and spend a little bit of time cleaning and sanitizing it, and that will actually solve the issue. But it is a sign that your city is destabilizing, and that you should be making sure that you make the health value in these houses higher to prevent this in the future. Also, what could happen is a sort of a spiraling effect. When a doctor stops by to heal one of the houses, as you might imagine, he is not gonna make the rounds anymore for that period. Well, while he's cleaning. That means that what happens is your houses might actually get more and more infected because he neglects to do the runs properly. So when you see a couple of buildings in a block do that, especially if it's an efficient block with a good walker layout where you maximize the stretch of land he can travel, like 22 by 6 blocks you make usually, you might actually need to slap down an extra clinic just to make sure that there is another walker covering the loop. Otherwise you might run into trouble where more and more housing gets sick, and you don't want that happening. Another thing I forgot to mention is that the overall city health also reflects the life expectancy of your inhabitants. And in some cases, high life expectancy means that people will retire and live off in the city for free. Basically, they will still pay taxes, but they will no longer contribute to our workforce. Therefore, it might sometimes kill even a very stable city if it's very old. So if you end up in that sort of situation, there are some ways how to fix this. One of the ways is actually to intentionally lower the health rating a bit, just so the old people will just pass away faster. And then the other way is more radical, and that's just cutting water access and letting them move away from the map. Like homeless people will just drag their things away, and once they leave the map, then you can actually enable the water again. It's a more radical solution for which you might need to prioritize prefects and engineers so that nothing really burns down, collapses, because you will lose a lot of workforce that way, but it will solve your issues with old population being stuck in your city. What happens with that is the people who are evicted from a house will actually, if they return, the human that's currently on the map left the house, if he returns somewhere and settles in, he will carry with him the population he had when he left, which means all those people you needed to be gone. So you need to wait until they leave the map, or use the aforementioned lowering of health intentionally to a level where there will be higher mortality rate and not as high life expectancy on purpose, but it's a dangerous thing because you might cause fumigations. Now, we talked about good things and how you can improve health, but we yet haven't talked about what actually is the purpose of all this. Why do you need to keep taking care of the health better and better as the city grows? It looks like you can get some modifiers pretty easily, right? Well, that's until you actually realize that Augustus adds a system of global malus for the amount of people that are in your city, and it gets worse and worse and worse as you get more and more people, and it's capped at 10,000 population, and that it gets no worse than that. But overall it can get quite severe. I will show you the chart for the Augustus health modifiers, and so on this chart you can see on the very left in each column you can see that there is house health value, and it is 0 up to 100. As you can see, as we talked about, 100 is a maximum health level in a house. And so on the very top of each column you can see a population that this column is for. So if your city, if you go from the left, if your city is at 0 or up to 1,000 population, it is gonna get affected by the first column of things, which means that if the house has 0 to 9 health, it will actually have sickness value per month, which is 10. So it might get sick or even fumigated, and that's gonna just add up. And so you want to prevent, even on very first tent block you establish, you need to make sure your services are in place, otherwise people could totally get fumigated and die off quite quickly. The other value, the percentage, is actually Malus to the city's healthcare overall. So it's worse to have a lot of low-level housing in your city, and that's what's causing a lot of the issues. It is still possible to play with that global labor pool and provide your labor tents or labor houses with ways to buff the overall health in the house, but without extra food sources it will get quite difficult. So that definitely means that you can no longer just get away with tents for supplying labor access like in vanilla, or Julius, where you would just have to cope with the prosperity hit basically, but you wouldn't care about the tenants being mad or anything. They would still mind taxes, but it was usually not a huge issue, because the tax system was pretty trivial in the base game. In Augustus it's all different. I'm gonna cover sentiment, taxes and these things in a separate video because it's a very deep subject. It requires its full-on video. I wanted to cover it together with this, but it's just not feasible. So you can see as the city builds up population, it can get up to a level where even anything below 100 health level in any house in your city will actually start to accumulate malus to the healthcare and accumulate sickness. So this way you need to make sure that if you build a large city, it actually needs to have a very good coverage of all the services as well as all the other modifiers you can just feasibly squeeze together to provide your city with all these bonuses so that the sickness does not accumulate and cause trouble in your city. I think this is gonna be everything for now. Maybe one thing to touch upon, if any of you might ask, previously in Augustus there was a version where sickness would affect industrial buildings like docks, granaries and such, and warehouses, which would happen when traders were trading goods or market ladies were fetching things. It would accumulate a disease rating, so you needed to provide clinic access even to your industrial buildings like that. That's no longer the case in the current unstable build, which many people use, so I'm not gonna mention it. Also, you might actually see some changes in the future. Who knows how the way of the development will go. So for now, this is the state at the current date when this video was made, but it might change up in the future, in which case I might actually update it or just post a comment to list the changes. I will be listing the Augustus manual in the description so you can check it out for yourself, and that's gonna be it from me for today. So thanks for watching and see you around. Cheers.